2.5 minutes.
Has anyone been to the Sam Adams Brewery right down in Jamaica Plain? Any brewery? No. That's something that I really want to do, but I haven't had the chance to do, so I did a little research of my own, and I will inform you guys, for you that have been or maybe want to go. There are 4 main ingredients in beer. It's barley, hops, water, and yeast. The main idea is to extract the sugar from the grains, and the yeast eats that all up and spits it out in the form of CO2 and alcohol. The word you probably don't know up here, don't recognize, is hops. Hops are a small vine-like plant, this is hops, and they produce this acorn-like bud, and that produces a powder called lupulin. Lupulin is what goes into the beer, and it gives the beer its flavor, and it also acts as a natural preservative for the beer. Hops are measured in IBUs, which are International Bitterness Units. As you can see on this is just a general guide, but you can see that they can range anywhere from 8 IBUs to 100 IBUs, which is a big difference, and it just depends on the lightness of the beer and what kind of beer it is, like lager, ale, porter. So the first step in beer making is malting. You start with a grain. It's usually barley, but it could also be something like rye or wheat. The grain is heated and dried, and that causes it to crack. And the idea here is that the enzyme gets isolated, and it's ready for the next step in the process, which is mashing. Mashing is kind of like you can picture tea being steeped, but the grains are being steeped in hot water. It's important that it's hot and not boiling water. And the idea here is that the enzyme reacts to the heat and cracks the grain, and the grain produces the sugar. Then that water is drained, and it has the grains and the sugars in it, and it's called wort. And wort is just unmade beer, just like dough is unmade bread. Then the wort is boiled. It boils for an hour, and at this step, the hops are added in at various points throughout the hour. It's important that they're not all added in at once. Again, the hops are what gives the beer its flavor and balances out the sweetness of the sugar. Then the beer is fermented. At this point, the brewing process is over, and the wort is put into sealed containers and the yeast is added into the containers. At this point, the yeast eats up all the sugar, and and it spits out the CO2 and alcohol, and it's the waste product of the whole thing. And this is just a picture of the chemical reaction happening. So depending on what kind of beer it is, it depends on how long and at what temperature the beer is fermented. If it's an ale, it's called top fermentation. So the yeast is at the top of the beer. So you want to ferment it at room temperature for a couple weeks. If it's a lager, the yeast sinks to the bottom of the beer, and it's called bottom fermentation. And you want to ferment it at a cooler temperature than if you were doing ale, and it's more than a couple of weeks. It could be several weeks to a couple of months. And again, this is just the chemical reactions happening. This is the yeast in the pictures. So the last step is bottling and aging. It needs to be carbonated. So beers can either be naturally carbonated or artificially carbonated. And when they are naturally carbonated, it's the yeast producing its own CO2, and that's called bottle conditioning. And I have a video. Just summing up the whole process. This is actually from the Sam Adams Brewery.
shorthand is you take the malt, you grind it, you add it to water at very specific temperatures. There are enzymes inside the barley that break down the starches and create the starches of the yeast you're going to eat.
Okay.
And the yeast is a living, breathing microorganism. And it eats the sugars that are in the wort at this time and converts it into alcohol and carbon dioxide and all those 600 other flavor compounds that make everybody think that, hey, that's beer.
That's beer.
From start to finish, 5 weeks to make Boston Lager.
Have you ever had one of these tanks and you go, oh, okay, it's not right?
Well, yeah. That's why they're small.
Good idea.
Yeah. Occasionally we make one that's not up to our standards.
Right.
So it goes down the drain. Now that you've seen the ingredients and you've seen how we make it.
That was just summing up what I've said. Basically, I gave you a very general understanding of how beer is made. It's also a very technical chemical process. I encourage you guys to look it up because it's really cool. Thank you.
We thank you. Thanks, Allison.